it had me asking myself, why? What's Christian about this? It doesn't make sense. But how many of you know what turf is? Peat. Peat, which we burn for the winter as fuel. Now, there was this particular priest in West Clare, and because priests aren't married in the Catholic Church, what people used to do for them is that parishioners would cut their turf in order that the priest would have fuel for the winter, which was only natural enough, because since a priest would have no family of his own, where else would he get fuel? So his parishioners would cut the turf for him. Now, when the turf was cut, they cut it, they would have a special spade for cutting it in the bog and throw it out. Hard work, I tell you. I used to do it, but we don't do it anymore. It's easier to buy coal now. But hard work with a shlon, as they call it, a turf spade. It has a wing on it like that. But in any case, it lies then flat down, but you have to rise it up then so that the sun and the wind will dry it. Now, what used to be done was the local school children, the senior classes of the primary school, they would get a day off school in order to, as they would call it, foot the turf. In other words, put it standing so that the wind and the sun would dry it. And of course, the children would be delighted as a kind of to get a half holiday from school to do this. They would be looking forward to getting this holiday. Now, the priest would come to the school and ask the principal of the school, would there be any possibility that the children could... Now, the principal couldn't refuse, because the priest was the manager of the school. So it was all a kind of a formality. No problem, Father, no problem. I'll send them up tomorrow to the bog in order to do the job. Thank you very much, and everything would get done. Now, on this particular occasion, the turf had been cut. It was all lying flat above with all the rest of the people's turf there. And the priest came down to the school, all very pleasant, down to the master, the schoolmaster. Any chance the children could be sent up tomorrow, 3rd, 4th and 5th class, or was it 4th, 5th and 6th classes? No problem that. Father, we'll send them up tomorrow. And the children did go up. Now, there was only one small problem. When they went up to the bog, how could they distinguish the priest's turf from the next bank of turf and the next and the next? For all the turf looked the same when it was all lying flat. So, above, cut. And of course the poor children, they didn't know. But there was a man there, so they asked him, excuse us, sir, which is the priest's bank? Now, he's a clever lad. And he saw the opportunity of getting his own turf footed. So he said, there, of course, pointing to his own turf. And of course the innocent children, they didn't know any better. So they started footing your man's turf. And did a good job. Now, the priest was a kindly man. And he sent up somebody with some food and a gallon of tea in the middle of the day. Fine, the children sat down and they had their meal and they had their tea. They'd bring back the gallon afterwards to the priest's house. And after their meal, they started in again and they footed the rest of the turf, and they had it all done by evening, except it wasn't the priest's turf that was done. It was the other man's turf. They left in the evening, having done a good day's work. A week passed, good sunny weather. The priest came to see his turf. It should be ready now for second footing, to be turned up the other way so that the bottom of it would dry as well. Only when he arrived, there was his own turf lying as flat as the day and as wet as the day it was cut. Well, the man was in a rage. After he feeding the ungrateful children, nothing done, he drew the conclusion, of course, that the blackguards, after being let out of school for a half day, had gone to the seashore or something, because the place is very near the sea. But they had gone down to the seashore playing football or something. Well, he went immediately to the school, stormed in, and almost attacked the master. Where are they? Where are they? These bloody... He used choice language anyway. And, of course, immediately the poor children, they're frightened out of their wits of the priest. And when the priest saw the poor children were frightened, genuinely, he calmed down. And he picked out one of them. And he said, "What happened? What happened above there in the bog?" And the poor child, shaking, explained about the man who took... What man? And the child described the man who had directed them, to the priest, his own turf. And immediately the priest recognized what had happened. And you know what happened? As I was told the story, 2 days later, that man walked over to the neighbouring pier, put his cap on the end of the pier, walked off the pier and committed suicide. And I always thought, oh yeah, it showed the priest's power all right, but I thought, over a bank of turf? And then commit suicide? Strange Christianity. Strange value. But I put it in because that genuinely was the story I was told by the old man. I'm not saying it's true, or I'm not saying it's false, or I'm not saying anything. But that's... so priests' curses could be a very dangerous thing if you got on the wrong side. And there's plenty of stories, for example, where priests and landlords, I could understand those, because English landlords, priests were the only person that finally you could go to if you ran into trouble with the landlord, because Irish people were kept down for so long. And you had no recourse to anybody else, because the landlord had the police and the magistrate and everybody else. Very often the landlord was the magistrate. He was the JP, the Justice of the Peace. So where did you go? You became a highwayman. But if you became a highwayman, that was what was waiting for you. So, you had nowhere to go except the priest. He was your final, he was the one who finally might be able to protect you. And there are plenty stories in Irish folklore about the poor man's cattle being driven away, and they consulted the priest. And he was the one who, when the peelers, that was a contemptuous name for the police, the peelers, after Sir Robert Peel, he was the one who founded them. And even that today, that name is used about the police in Ireland, or the peelers. When you want to call the police something bad, you call them the peelers. It's from British times. But he's the one, very often, who stuck them to the road. The reputation is stick him to the road, so that the poor man could claim back his cow again and drive him away, while the poor peelers were stuck to the road and could do nothing about it except stand there in frustration and only be released when the police or when the priest wanted them to be released. Now, there are plenty of stories like that. So I don't know whether you have any stories like that in Russia or not, about your priests, because I'm sure you had plenty of repression in Russia as well as we had repression in Ireland. It'd be interesting to see whether there's any similarities between the religious stories of Russia and the religious stories of Ireland. I wonder, has anybody ever done a study like that? Interesting study at the moment. It is of German soldiers. And he has found it very, very difficult to get him to talk. But of German soldiers who fought on the Eastern Front in the Second World War, and when they came home, what was the reaction? Now, what the interest for this for me was, my two uncles fought with the British Navy in the Second World War, and they couldn't come home to their native place because they fought with the English. They never came home because they fought with the English. He is trying to, what was the reaction when these German soldiers came home? Because they were with the Nazis, so it's a delicate subject, very delicate subject. He has found a few who were willing to talk, and it's delicate and interesting after all those years. I'm trying to, with my relatives and the British, he with that and the Germans, because that's what he works in Germany. But it makes an interesting subject. A long way from folklore, you might say, but not so long, because it still means talking to people, sometimes about things that they feel uncomfortable with. I'm sometimes asked, why can't I turn over my archive of all those 37 years of talking? Why can't I turn them over to some public body? And I've been asked many times, why? I've been offered PhD twice by universities for that collection. I said, I don't want a PhD. I don't want any. I can't, because there's too much private material in those interviews. Stuff that can never be let out. For example,